Nickel is one of those materials that have few uses by themselves, but are integral to a single process with a single companion material that makes it absolutely essential to every single economic sector. Standard steel bends and rusts and corrodes and warps and loses some of its coherence with high or low temperatures. But add about 3.5% nickel and a splash of chromium to the steel mix, and you get an alloy that is both stronger and largely eliminates those concerns. We colloquially know this product as stainless, the backbone of nearly all steel used in every single application. The forging of such stainless accounts for more than 2/3 of total global nickel demand. Other nickel metal alloys account for another 1/5. 1/10 goes into electroplating, with the balance going into batteries. As one might expect, China is the world's largest importer, refiner, and user of nickel ore. But the ubiquitous nature of steel in pretty much everything, everywhere, means that even China's large-scale, breakneck industrialization and urbanization cannot dominate the entire market. Unlike aluminum, where much of the resulting finished metal is exported, the bulk of the nickel ore the Chinese refine and blend into steel is used at home. So whereas China's impact on the aluminum market is an all-caps issue that has destroyed the capacity of competitors the globe over, China's nickel-related steel habits are merely highly distortionary. Nickel is one of those rare materials where the implosion of global trade will not automatically result in the implosion of the market. 4 of the top 5 producers, Indonesia, the Philippines, Canada, and Australia, are ones that have alternative markets for their nickel sales in their own neighborhoods. The last of the top 5, the French territory of New Caledonia, is highly likely to see its output plunge as internal debates over whether it wants to be a failed colony or a failed country override all other thinking. The number 6 slot goes to Russia, which produces nearly all its nickel from a single complex near that god-awful city of Norilsk. Add in Russia's building geopolitical, financial, demographic, and transport complications, and I'd not count on Norilsk being a major source of global metals supplies a couple of decades from now. Add it all up, and the nickel market might actually achieve something that much of the soon-to-be world will become eminently unfamiliar with: balance. I'm not going to bother with the more blasé uses for silicon. The silicon that goes into glass is typically sourced from normal sand. Purification is required, obviously, but we cracked the code for that process nearly 2 millennia before Rome. And in modern times, it doesn't require a particularly sophisticated industrial base to churn out glass at volume. Nor am I going to look at the other big use for sand, part of the input process for unconventional oil production, aka fracking. After a few years, the oil services firms discovered that nearly any basic sand will work just fine. No, we're going to instead focus on the silicon products that are much higher up the value-added scale and more integral to day-to-day life in the modern world. Silicon is wildly common, accounting for something like 1/4 of the Earth's crust. We think of silicon most commonly as sand because we immediately and emotionally attach sand to beaches and lakes. But in reality, most of the world's silicon is locked up in quartz and silica rocks. Such rocks are far better than beach sand because they aren't contaminated with algae, plastics, hypodermic needles, or pee. If you're making glass, 98% purity is A-OK. But the absolute lowest grade for silicon as an actual industrial input is 99.95% pure. Getting there requires a blast furnace, which typically requires a lot of coal. Overall, the process isn't all that complicated. You basically just bake the quartz until anything that is not silicon burns away, which means some 90% of this first step processing tends to be done in countries like Russia and China, countries with a lot of surplus industrial capacity that don't give two shits about environmental issues. This quality level is more than fine for most of what we use silicon for. Roughly 1/3 of production ends up in things we know as silicones, a broad category that includes everything from sealants to kitchen utensils to gaskets to coatings to fake boobs. And silicates, which go into ceramics, cement, and glass. Nearly half is alloyed with aluminum to make the creatively named silumins, which have largely replaced steel in any product where shedding a lot of weight is more important than being able to take a tank shell, most notably in train and automobile frames. There is no improving vehicle mileage without a lot of aluminum and silicon. No electronic vehicles either. Greens take note. Smelting aluminum is power intensive. Forging silicon is power intensive. Alloying them is power intensive. The frame for an EV requires roughly quintuple the energy input of a traditional car. That's one of a score of inconveniently non-environmentally friendly details Tesla leaves out of its advertising. Such products are both important and omnipresent, but they aren't the sexy part of the story. That comes from the final two product categories. First up are solar panels. The 99.95% purity of standard silicon isn't anywhere near enough. A second round in the blast furnace gets silicon up to 99.99999% pure. That's 7 nines. Round 2 is far more sophisticated than round 1's bake it pure. China's GCL Group is the only Chinese entity that can manage such precision at scale, making it responsible for 1/3 of global supply. The rest comes from a smattering of developed world companies. This pure silicon is incorporated into the solar cells that make solar panels do their thing, with the assembly work more often than not done in China. Second are the semiconductors, with silicon being by far the biggest input by volume. And since some of the newer semiconductors are shaped at nearly the atomic level, the silicon must be 99.9999999% pure. That's 10 nines. No way that gets done in China. Once some first